this is finally somebody was honest with me and was like, hey man, I would love to have you on my podcast, but your topic is not what my audience would tune in for. And I'm like, that's a really nice way of saying, I can't afford to have you on there because you're a hot button.
Yeah, because obviously you have a podcast yourself, so you probably noticed, like, I remember my first episode till now, and there's always still something, and you're like, oh shit, I gotta do this. Yeah, something always happens. The only good time there was when I was in my office, and I really had everything set up exactly where it needed to be, and it was always like perfect. But then even something might go wrong.
Right.
And then,
and I'm on the road this week. I'm in Miami doing assessments down here. I work 2 days a week, kind of as a private contractor. I mean, I'm W-2, but as a private contractor in my full-time job, but I'm only having to really do 2 days worth of work. So I'm traveling to Miami, traveling back. Those count as both travel days. I don't, because I drive fast. So I get home, do my reports, and then I can hang out with the family and, still be working toward, which is the whole reason why I got a job, right? Because I've been just podcasting full time for about a year now. And kind of once I got my idea down of what my skill set would apply to, and I'd always been thinking about where could I go where it isn't already oversaturated, and where all of my skill set, from law enforcement, from security, from being an EMT, from being a prison guard, from working at the Baghdad embassy as a ambassador's PSD, all of it, Rangers, Marine Corps, everything that I've done it's kind of weird when I explain it to people what my resume is. And it's really wild whenever I go apply for a job and it's somebody I don't know, because they're always like, what kind of life have you lived? I'm like, well, you're thinking of the oil fields, I'm guessing. They're like, yeah, you lived on oil rigs too? I'm like, yeah, so I lived on oil rigs for a little while. It's just every 3 years for my entire adult life, something in the world has transitioned, or something significant in my world has transitioned, aside from my goal, my plan, which I always thought was going to be one thing. And then the world backhanded me into what you see today, which is the weirdest amalgamation of strange, but what I think of as skills that apply toward helping find solutions to in-school shootings. The problem, as I mentioned to you, is that people don't want to have me on their podcast. You're one of the only people that offered to actually have me on a podcast. Because
really?
People do not want to talk about the topic of it because they're worried. And this is finally somebody was honest with me and was like, hey man, I would love to have you on my podcast, but your topic is not what my audience would tune in for. And I'm like, that's a really nice way of saying, I can't afford to have you on there because you're a hot button. And that's what other people had kind of told me. Well, it's kind of a topic that is very much anti-gun. Everybody has to have guns all the time, and so that's ultimately where I'm stuck right now. I mean, I've got the full-time job right now, so I'm kind of having to shift my focus a little bit. I haven't put out a podcast episode in several weeks now because I'm having to make sure and focus and get everything on this job down pat. But that's kind of where I'm stuck. So I'm also kind of rethinking if I want to continue this topic as my full time. And I really think that I shouldn't, because what I think is the people that I already had a list of, my dream list of people that I wanted to interview, I've interviewed. I was able to get every one of them. Aside from, I say dream list, I mean, of course, like, your Joe Rogan's, Tim Kennedy's, like the crazy ones are still on a list, but it's like Sean Ryan, like, yeah, it'd be great to have a discussion with one of those guys someday. But for me, the people who have invented real things that really can save kids' lives today, as we were doing this podcast, and you don't know about it at home, and no one you have ever met knows anything about it either, is mind-blowing to me. But then again, it isn't, because, again, if I'm getting this much blowback, and with my background, I have things in common with most humans. So if I'm getting that blowback just trying to have a conversation with people, I can only imagine what it's like to try to sell these products to school boards, to, to entities that are all about liability. They really care about liability and their paychecks, and that's the sad truth. But that's what every one of these guys, the guy my last interviewee who had just written the book, detective, changes his whole life, focuses on school shooting. He's on the ground at every school shooting major school shooting there's been. Sandy Hook, Uvalde, you name it. He's literally been talking with the parents, talking with the family. He's dedicated his life toward this. And again, same thing. People don't want to have him on a podcast. People don't really know much about his products. He bought a factory because he knew that the film that could stop not the bullet from going through it, because anybody who has real experience knows you're not going to get bulletproof glass for schools to pay for that. They're not embassies. He buys a factory to build the film to really be able to keep people from just shooting the glass and walking through, which we've seen school shooters get in that way, or the church shooter. I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but just bang, bang, shoots the glass, walks right through the door. That wouldn't have happened had they had this film, right? But again, he's written multiple books, but he just wrote this book. He's been a retired detective. He's very well known. Same thing. People just don't want to share his stuff, put that out there. They don't want to. It's frustrating.
No, definitely. And then the crazy thing is it is a sad truth, but because you do have the background for it, talking about the whole Marine Corps, SOCOM, the police, law enforcement, triple canopy, all that different stuff. Like, you have the background for it, the security for it, is the stuff in Baghdad. Like, your job was literally security for high asset people. So it's like, why not? I mean, kids are the most high value assets there are.
Yeah, I mean, that's literally the two places on planet Earth that are the highest threats are Baghdad, Iraq, and Kabul, Afghanistan. This was when we were still in Afghanistan, obviously. And that was literally my job, was to recruit. They hired me as a recruiter while my paperwork was going through, because I was already recruiting in Tampa, Florida, where they needed a recruiter. So they said, hey, a genius who was in charge at the time at Triple Canopy was like, hey, how would you like to recruit the guys that you're going to go work with? I was like, well, what's the stipulations to that? He's like, if you can justify it, you're going to go do it wherever you want to go. You're in Tampa. I need somebody in Southeast region, but you can go anywhere, wherever you need to go get your guys. So I'm flying back and forth to Seattle to go up and recruit from 2nd Ranger Battalion, to recruit from the SF community, because that's my guys. That's the people that I physically know. That's the people that, with my background in the Ranger Regiment, it was a no-brainer to go do that. And I ended up recruiting Rangers, SF guys, a lot of former Marines, of course, tend to want to go toward the contracting route as well. But that was phenomenal. And then getting to go overseas and then meet those dudes and work with them, that was kind of a worm through. But like say, exactly what you just said, like, it's the highest threat on the planet. That's why Department of State has it. And if you can keep the ambassador himself, which was the detail that I was on specifically, was the ambassador's protection detail. If you can keep him alive, and then we start getting attacked, and it's like, all right, here we go. This is about to be a Benghazi, and my wife's at home. She has no idea what's going on, and my phone, like a genius, I had thrown all my stuff in my bag, and I run downstairs. I've got the 240, I've got the saw, I have everything, and they're like, hey, we need somebody who's fast that can run all the way across the compound. Somebody grabbed the keys, and he ran all the way across the compound, thinking we were there. We came here. We need to go get the keys. Immediately, I volunteer, and everybody already knows I'm a runner. And I'm like, all right, I'm out. So I take off running, and I run across the compound, go to the building. That guy's not there anymore. And the second we get there, the rockets start coming in, or the threat of the rockets. Supposedly, rockets are landing. That's the call that goes out. And now we're locked down in that building. And we weren't ever able to leave that building. We stayed locked down. I was in the CIA housing. And so the pictures that I have, obviously I can share with you, is me on top of the CIA housing, sitting up there with my 10-inch shorty barrel, watching as the thousands of people amass, and as they start, all their chanting, they start throwing Molotov cocktails, rocks, everything. And I'm just like, well, this is surreal. Here we go again. Another opportunity for me to not make it home. We'll see what happens. So I'd been on a couple of those in the Ranger Regiment at the beginning of the war. I was there for the invasion, was my first deployment. And then here I am, 40 at that point, 40 years old, just about. I think I just turned 40. No, I just turned 39. I'm like, I came over here to get money so I could do IVF, so we could have a family. My combat veteran Marine wife is at home with our contractor dog, who actually had to be retired because he has PTSD. And they're sitting at home. Well, I'm here, and I left my phone back in the building because I expect to run back to it. And now here we are, and it's everything starts burning. They burn the gates to the ground, and we're like, that's our way out, because behind us is the Euphrates River. So I guess we're gonna jump in that cesspool. That'll be fun. It's not like we have anywhere to go. So yeah, it was a wild time to live through. Again, crazy stories. Ironically today, of course, is election day, and I'm not a political person. At the time, I had served under Bush, right, during the War on Terror, the invasion of Iraq, of course. And I've got my feelings about George W. and I'll keep those to myself. But what I will say is that with what Donald Trump greenlit, right? Because he greenlit, I'm alive today. Like, I would definitely not be alive. And that's my experience of what happened with Benghazi, with all the dudes that knew what really happened there, with all the contractors contractors are a tight community, obviously. When Hillary Clinton was in charge of the Department of State, it really suffered from a lot of things, but at the top, you're green lever, red lever. Either you're allowing people to go, possibly protect these people or not, or, and there's a lot of political things that go into all that. All I know is, we got so much support when we were being attacked. Although I had the feeling like, it's Department of State, I don't know how this is about to go. I'm really hoping that things have improved since Benghazi, but the track record isn't that great. And, and then all of a sudden we start some sneaking personnel start showing up to the embassy while it's under attack, right? So 6'8", throat tattoos, face tattooed, so some meat eaters who show up at an embassy that's burning to the ground, and they start snatching up all the CIA kids, and you're like, oh, I know who you guys are, cool. And then they start hauling those kids off. The irony is, I say kids because they were young. These were, newer age people, and they end up flying them out to, I forget the name of the place that they flew them to, but they ended up flying them to another location in Iraq where it would be safer for them. And then Iraq ended up shooting rockets at that place. If you remember hearing that there was a huge rocket attack on that base, Erbil. They flew them to Erbil because that's where they had a protected area and safe houses out there. And that's the spot that ends up getting rocketed while we're here. And they felt like they had, got away. And ironically, they're in more danger there, and again, our gates are burned to the ground. They can't come in through that way. So that's a plus. They've got to come over the wall. And they did come over the wall. And some of them came over the wall, was waiting for us to shoot them. And then we didn't shoot them because we knew where the line was, and they knew where the line was. There's a line in the sand that they know that if they cross that, then they've trespassed to the point that we have to kill them. So they didn't really want to meet all of that day. Just those guys that came over that wall, they didn't really want to actually go through with it. They wanted to, to demonstrate to everybody how brave they were by jumping over that wall. But then they jumped back over that wall, back to their camp pretty quick. And I don't know how, but for, another one of those instances where God lets everybody survive and we all come home, and it's a wild experience to have had. But kind of confusing at the same time. Like, I don't understand everything that just happened, but I'm glad to be alive. And yeah, had a lot of those.
No, I can only imagine. So obviously you've done so much since the Marine Corps, and I remember you bringing it up right now, like you've done so many things every 3 years, but what were you expecting to be when you were a Marine in the beginning?
So that's a great question. So when I was very first, I never wanted to join. I wanted to be Rambo as a kid. Of course, everybody wanted to be Rambo as a kid in the 80s. But I didn't really know much about the military, except for my dad had joined the Navy and then he quit in the middle of his enlistment. He got on his Harley, rode off the ship, and never came back.
Good.
It was under the Carter administration, so they were like, oh, okay, good. Check that mark. They didn't even care at all. Like, he had no issues whatsoever, and nobody ever asked him about it. And then, I think 15 years later, somebody was like, hey, were you supposed to fill out some paperwork at some point when you were getting out? And he's like, yeah, I was supposed to. And they're like, oh, here, sign this. And as far as I know, that's the story basically that he told me. Like, he never got in trouble for it. They just gave him a general discharge, I believe. But of course, he didn't go into the military. He didn't go to law enforcement. He didn't need a clearance for anything. So nobody really asked. So that's my background. Like, nobody in my family tree, cousins, grandparents, uncles, nobody had ever served in the military. So for me, I'm strange compared to most people I've ever met. I have a very addictive personality toward whatever it is that I'm focused at doing. And so I just decided that I enjoyed running and nobody else does. So I'm going to keep doing that. And so in high school, went to state. I didn't start running until my junior year. And I go to state my senior year for the 2-mile race. And if you know much about Oklahoma, we produce some pretty fast long distance runners and some really high quality long distance guys. You can trace it back to our Native American history. It's my background. I'm Creek Muskogee people. So I guess it runs in our blood, but I wasn't great at it. But I just kept running. And so I would put in the miles. And although I didn't really know how to run efficiently, I just kept doing it until I found something that worked, and I kept improving on that. So I kind of taught myself, and I had a buddy who really did the studying on it, and he ran the 1 mile and I ran the 2 mile, and we both ended up going to state together. And, from that background, it's like nobody in your family trees ever graduated high school. So let's start there. So my dad technically graduated high school, but he only attended 5th grade. That he was uprooted by my grandpa, who had whipped the church off for a bunch of money. They moved to South America. He starts a church down there. He's a very, very shady, terrible human. My grandfather on my dad's side. And so my dad is raised with no schooling. He just reads Westerns. That was his education. Then he moves back to the U.S. They all moved back to the U.S. in I think he said his junior year of high school, the beginning of his junior year. And they're like, hey, take this test. Okay, now you're a junior. So he officially did 7 years, including kindergarten through 5th grade. And then he goes to junior and senior, and they just basically gave him a diploma. But anybody actually just going through school, I was the first person. My family tree, all cousins, all grandparents, my mom, my sister, everybody dropped out, everybody. So for me to have a master's degree, obviously, little strange in the family. Nobody thinks that I have a big head because of it. It's just, I found that I had a goal. I'd always wanted to go to college and be the first. So I go to college, and I'm thinking, when I get out of the Rangers, I know I'm bouncing all over the place, but bear with me here. High school, so I graduate high school. I'm the first. Okay, cool. That feels great, but I know that I can do more firsts. And so at that moment, I was really always thinking I was going to be a firefighter. So I'm already got my mindset, what classes I'm going to take. I've got to take my general studies, and then I'm going to be getting into a fire school, and I'll be going that route. So get forward 1 semester. I feel like I'm wasting my life at community college, taking these classes that are getting me nowhere fast. And the professors aren't even in the classroom. They just like tell us what the assignment is and they leave. And so I'm working full time during the day and taking classes at night because my parents never gave me a penny. And so I'm paying for everything while working construction during the day. And I was like, there's got to be a better way to pay for college than this. And then I end up seeing 3 Marines walking through the mall, barrel chested, having a good time, wearing Marine Corps stuff, fit. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to look into this. So I go track a recruiter down. I call him. I go find him. He doesn't come find me. And I'm like, hey, this is what I'm looking for. And he gets me the intangibles list. And he's like, look, all the things you're wanting are the intangibles. All the other things, college money, those are nice to haves, but that's not what you're focused on. You want discipline. You want to be in a brotherhood. You want all these things on this list. That's what you circled. I was like, obviously, I would love that. He's like, well, the Marine Corps is where you want to be. So let's find a contract for you. And I was like, I'm going to think about it. I'm slow down there, recruiter. And then Staff Sergeant Lynch, I'll never forget him. He was a solid dude. And he's like, what job would you want to do if you could do any job? I said, obviously, Marine Force Recon is the one thing I know about. And it's that's that poster you have on the wall from the 80s, the 90s, whatever it is. That's the same poster. And I was like, I want to go through the hardest training that I could possibly go through, but I want to be a firefighter. And he's like, so you want to be a reservist, but you want to go through the hardest training. You can't be in Force Recon because they're only active duty. Anybody going into Force Recon reserves, there are reserves. You have to have been active duty, and that's a secondary transition afterwards. And I was like, okay, well, I can't do that because I've got to go to fire school. I want to be a firefighter. And they're like, all right, what else do we have? And he yells at another recruiter at the back, and the guy pokes his head out. He's like, what are you looking for? And he's like, infantry, something hard. And he's like, well, we've got Marine infantry heavy weapons specialists. You could be that in Tulsa, which is like a 2-hour drive from here in Oklahoma City. And yeah, you could just do that once a week, one week in a month and 2 weeks a year, be a firefighter. And I was like, so wait, that's the hardest training you can go through and still be a reservist. He's like, that I know of. And I was like, all right, where's this contract? So it was like that. For me, it was a no-brainer. I didn't think that was a reality because I just always thought Fort Sid was where they have cannon cockers and you're just shooting artillery rounds off, and I don't want to do that. So once he said that, that's when my life changed to focus was Marine Corps. Now I'm working out 3 times a day instead of 2, and I'm focused on getting in the Marines. I didn't go right away. I wanted to be over prepared. So I already knew all my general orders. I already knew everything I needed to know, memorized before I ever showed up for boot camp. So when I show up, I run faster than the max speed, right? So the required for a 300, you have to do 3 miles in 18 minutes or less. I run a 17:30. So automatically, I'm one of 4. There's only 4 of us now after the first PFT and all Marine Corps boot camp. And these are dudes. There was one dude who he had ran in the Olympics, but he got hit by a car while he was out running one day, and somebody ran a stop sign and plowed over his leg. Like, professional athletes, national champion. Who does it? He played for Texas A&M, like a defensive lineman. Like those, you're going to run into like elite athletes in there, and then farm boys and homeboys and everybody else in between. And it's such a weird mixture. And you're going to run into some shady dudes that do some shady things. But man, what I will say is, because everybody asked me the same question when they hear that I was in the Marines and that I was in the Rangers, and they go, which one's better? Which one's harder? And I always say the exact same thing. So at my core, I'm a Marine, period. But what changed my life from who I used to be, keep in mind, like I've already told you this. So I was raised obese. I had buck teeth as a kid. I was kind of the fat loser kid in your classroom. I didn't pick my nose a lot, but if you get that idea, that's kind of who I was. And I never talked. I was super quiet because I wasn't supposed to talk. That's how I was raised. Kids are silent. And so I was this very, very, I thought, introverted, just not good at anything kid. And then I just decided to start running one day so I could lose weight because my grandma kept telling me how fat I was. So my sister becomes anorexic and bulimic. I decide I'm going to start running instead of starving myself. So we both took different paths that way. Yeah. What I ended up changing my physiology, right? It changes my body. So now I'm physically in shape for whatever I want to do, because running will fix you fast. You're not going to be the strongest person in the gym, but you're going to be able to go for hours, and everybody else is going to be wondering how. And so when I found that I could do that kind of set in motion, hey, I'm good-ish at something, but I don't know how good. Then I finally go to a school where they actually have a decent track team and all that. So that's my path there. I get into the Marine Corps. When I graduate Marine Corps boot camp, I completely change from an introvert to an extreme extrovert. I don't stop talking a lot as it is, which is obviously why I need a podcast. And my wife is a very, very introverted. She's a female Marine as well, combat veteran. She's extremely introverted, but she has extroversion. So we mesh because I always talk, and she always tells me how much I talk. But the crazy thing is that she was very, very shy and introverted kind of as well. And then the same thing happened. And then when people ask me, well, they just turned you into a psycho. I know somebody, my brother went into the Marines and he came out a different person. No, he did not. No, she did not. They did not come out a different person. What happened is they actually show you who they really were, and you don't like it. Got it. You can dislike who they actually are, but you can't tell me that the Marine Corps changed you, because boot camp. Now you go to war, there's a whole lot of things there. When you go through that training, all that is doing is beating into your head that you need to be a team player, while you're not allowed to have a name, identity, or anything. So you're and not talk to each other for a very long time. I remember not speaking to anybody, otherwise getting in trouble. But what happened when I came out of that is I'm a completely different person for the rest of my life. So when a Marine like that, with that background, reserves, at the same time I'm working out 3 times a week while I'm in the reserves. When we show up and train with the active duty Marines, we blew them away. But that's all. We did that because these guys are getting beat down every day, all day, doing 40-mile humps in 29 palms heat, while we're getting a college education and eating good food, getting plenty of sleep, doing what we want to do on our own regiment, and we're extremely disciplined. So the dudes that I was with at that unit specifically were active duty law enforcement, former college wrestlers, like legit guys who already had their bachelor's degrees, could have been officers. They didn't want to because they enjoy doing hard things. So that's whenever I talk to people about that, I just say, the Marine Corps boot camp will bring out of you who you really are. And then in the Ranger Regiment, unless you've ever been in the regiment, it's kind of hard to explain this. You're extremely disciplined at not being disciplined. You're the most, speaking on behalf of me and all the guys that I personally served with closely and know, we're always looking for a way to not follow the rules. If you have to walk here, we're always going to walk on the grass. If you need to do this first before you go to that line, we're going to go to that line. We're going to talk all the way through it instead. We don't want to wait back here. Like any way that you can get around. We go to Ranger School, which is an Army school, not a Ranger school. It's an Army leadership school. You have to say the word Ranger 50 million times as you run around the PT pit. It's part of the initial PT tests and all of the stuff you got to do at the very beginning. And me and my my Ranger buddy at the time, Domey, which if you haven't heard of him, Chris Domey, he got killed in action, 2nd Ranger Battalion. He was a fort observer, same as me from 2nd Ranger Battalion. When we met up, we were both like, we're both fisters. Okay, awesome. So we're both fort observers. We're going to stick together. And so we start running around the PT pit, and we have to say Ranger, and it's stupid. We know it. And so we say Wagner. Why? It makes no sense. We're both Rangers. Why would you even just do something? We just had to find a way to do something that we're not supposed to do at all times. Same thing happens when you send us to the Derby Queen, and we've got to go run the obstacle course. We're going to run our mouth about challenging everybody to do this faster than them, and da-da-da-da. So the instructors put all of us at the very back of formation, so everybody else goes first. So we got to go last. And then what happens? We, of course, take that as a challenge, and now we're going to go run the obstacle while you're on it, and we're going to run over you on the obstacle while you're on it, because he just challenged us. And this is a Ranger instructor who's never been a Ranger. He has never served in the regiment. He's never been in special ops. He's in the Army. He went through an Army school, and he wears the word Ranger on his shoulder, and he tells everybody at the bars that he's a Ranger. Meanwhile, he has no idea what we actually do, what it's really like to live the life of a Ranger. So that kind of gives you a little idea there. I remember I was a PFC in Iraq during the invasion, 2nd deployment. So OIF 1, we do the invasion. We get to Baghdad. We get sent home. Everything's good. We come back. New Army 3-star general rolls up to our gate. This is the SOCOM compound. You don't stroll into the SOCOM compound. It doesn't matter who you are. And as Ranger privates, PFCs, we're told, like, it doesn't matter what they have on their shoulder, who they know. I don't care who it is. They can't come in here. And if they are coming in here, you have to get authorization, and otherwise you would already know. And you're still going to hold them at gunpoint. So I remember 3-star Marine general Army general rolls up to our compound, and he's getting out and barking orders at us. And we're like, I haven't heard some guys showing up. So we end up going out and talking to him, and he's, as arrogant as a human can possibly be, and talking to us like we're not even humans. We're so below him. Just get this stupid gate open, mother, and just going off on us. And we're just like, sorry, sir, if you're not with the task force, we're not allowed to let you in under any circumstances. So, and he's like, I won it. And he just starts going off on us. He's like, I'm like, okay, but if somebody back there tells us to let you in, we can. Otherwise we can't. Like, don't kill the messenger. He was so furious. And here I am, PFC, standing with my rifle, and I'm not playing. And he gets in, he leaves. Guess what? He never got into the compound because he didn't have authorization to get into. And it didn't matter what your rank was. And we got that a lot, especially officers with a star. Whenever generals were around, they wanted to be saluted. And of course, we've all seen Forrest Gump. You don't salute officers in combat. How do you not still take that serious? Like, how is that not something that you take serious? And they wouldn't. They would march across the street in Kabul. I got stopped multiple times in Kabul for not saluting. And he wants me to salute him. And, all right, here we go. Well, the most disrespect. But again, I've got that Marine Corps mentality where I'm like, bro, you're Army. Like you never served in special ops. I can see on your shoulder, you'd have it. You'd have something out there if you did. You just, like, you did paperwork, I'm sure. You did great things, I'm sure, somewhere. But as a PSC, I'm like, I've seen probably more crazy things and done way harder things as a human, just as an individual human, than you've ever done. You walk around and everybody salutes you. Wherever you go visit, everything is nice and trim and repainted. Like, that's not the world I live in. I live in one where I'm not supposed to come back from this mission last week. And guess what? Somehow I'm still here. And my parents have my letter and they're told not to open it. And I hope they don't open it because that's my like, hey, I didn't make it. Just so you know, love you, you know. So I had to send that letter out a couple of times. And I was just like, I don't know how I'm going to make it back, but if God wants me to survive, I'm going to survive. And for some reason, he keeps me around my bald head.
I like it. I'm actually really curious. So what's that transition like from the Marine Corps to the Army and to get into Ranger
So
school? Like,
as far as the transitioning on the initial, like the paperwork side, that side, or are you talking about the what's it like for you to transition being a Marine going into the Army?
About it, like, okay, I want to make this change now. How does that even work? Like, because I know once you're a Marine, you don't have to go to boot camp for the Army, right?
Yeah, no.
So, right.
Yeah. Your training supersedes all the other branches naturally. That being said, Space Force wasn't around when I was doing this, so I don't know. But I would imagine Space Force is not harder than Marine Corps boot camp, so I'm sure it supersedes that too. So here's the insane part, and this makes no sense. It never has made sense. Still doesn't make sense. If there's a recruiter out there and it's changed, please let me know, because as far as I know, it's still exactly the same way. When you were in the Marine Corps Reserve and the recruiter, Staff Sergeant Lynch, he told me about this over and over. If you're going to go active duty, you have to go initially. Otherwise, you were screwed. And that's all he said, right? He didn't mean to explain any more of that. I understood. And I'm, a year and a half, 2 years in the reserves when 9/11 happens. 9/11 happens. That was the day that my life changed trajectory of I'm no longer going to be a firefighter. I'm no longer going to do any of the things I was going to do. I am going to go fight this war. I am going to go be a part of it. My unit said, sit down, wait your turn. It's going to be about 18 months minimum before we go anywhere. I said, enjoy that. I'm going to go ahead and go somewhere else where we're going to go over now. And so I had no idea what that looked like. Again, I'm a Marine Corps Revo cocky, right? I don't have a lot of respect for the other branches unless it's their special operations, right? So I'm not just going to go be a sailor to go over on a ship and clean things. So I have to go lateral and up. I don't go down. And so I'm like, I want to go do something that's as hard as what I've been through and harder, not the other way, not looking to go down. So I talked to all these different recruiters, and what I found out real fast in the Marine Corps is I called all the recruiters in the state. Nobody will help me because I'm already in. So they get nothing for helping me. And it's September 11th, 2001. It's kind of crazy at the moment for recruiters. And everybody's trying, if you remember, there was lines around the block of people trying to rejoin. Old, veterans in their 50s that are trying to rejoin up, fight the war somehow, support the country. So I'm just another dude who's worse than that. I'm already in, so I already have a slot, and I'm just not satisfied with where I am at 18 months waiting possibly to go over. I will fast forward for everybody and let you know what's interesting is I end up running into one of my buddies years after the war and all this, going through the police academy. He went with my unit when they got deployed. So I get to see through the looking glass what I would have done. I would have went to Djibouti, Africa, and sat for 18 months. It was over a year. It was either a year or 18 months. Sit there doing absolutely nothing and then come home. That's it. That was their combat deployment. So it is interesting, though, that I ended up running into somebody, got to see what I would have done had I not transitioned over. Pay for work. He says, finally, this one recruiter was like, hey, man, I'd love to help you. I get it. You want to get over there and fight. On my free time, on my time, I'll try to help you. He's looking for everything. He's looking for ways to make it happen. He says, this is the only way that I have found. And again, this was his best that he had found at that time. It was crazy. But he was like, you have to find somebody. You have to recruit them to go into the Marine Corps. They have to say when they're signing up for the Marine Corps and they're contracting that they are going to go to, right, they're going to go into the reserves at your unit. And they're, by the way, they're going to be taking your place. That's the whole point. So when they're doing all their paperwork, everything's semi-normal, but it has to also be made known to everybody that they are going to check in and replace me, not just add one to the unit. And then that person now, which I'm thinking, okay, half of the guys I went through boot camp with didn't make it. It was 50% from the very first class we went through the initial training with, and then half of them fell off, got hurt, got sick, you name it. Got dropped, quit, all of the above. And then get to infantry school. Some studs ended up getting permanently mangled and sent home, never to return, just because of how physically daunting it was up and down the mountains in California. He was a track star. He fell down on his face, jumped up, took off sprinting out of nowhere. We were on a 20-mile hike at the very end of SOI, School of Infantry. And we all they had to tackle him, and they put him on the truck, and he's fighting, and he's a stout dude. Get him back, and he has a core temperature of whatever it was. It's like 104, something insane. It was like he was killing brain cells, right? And they're like, hey, did you know you have asthma? He's like, I was a track star. I could have went collegiate as I think he was a sprinter, And they're like, doesn't matter, bro. You have asthma. That you literally had lack of oxygen. That's why you freaked out like that. Your brain was boiling in your head. You were overheated, but it happened because of asthma. So he's gone. He already went through boot camp. He already made it all the way through SOI, and he was literally like 3 miles from the end of the 20-mile hike. Like, so that kind of stuff happens. So somebody's going to do all that. Then after that, they still have to go through heavy weapons training, which it's not like anybody failed out of our very tiny class that we had. But at the same time, you have to memorize every tank in the world that could be on a battlefield. And you have 1.5 seconds when they flash it on the screen to know exactly what that tank was. Like, you can't mess up anything, and they're going to go through all the tanks in the world. If you get that wrong, you're done. Now you're just going to be infantry. Okay. So that's that. I was like, that's just not happening. So I'm like, what's my other recourses? He's like, oh, well, you can go to any other branch anytime you feel like it. I'm like, how does that make sense? He's like, they're banking on Marines are not going to leave the Marine Corps. That's all I can tell you. I don't know any other logical answer. So you can go into any other branch anytime you feel like it. And I already knew that several dudes from my unit had transitioned to the Army, but they were doing it to go, right? They wanted something easier. And so they did. They just transitioned to Army active duty and went and were tow gunners in Fort Campbell, I think, is where a couple of dudes went. And I was like, yeah, obviously I'm not doing that unless I'm going into special forces, special operations. And he's like, okay, well, let me keep looking, but otherwise, yeah, I'd recommend you go to one of those branches, recruiters. So of course I look into the serials. I'd never heard of a PJ back then. There was no such thing. I'd never heard of that. It's Navy SEALs, Green Berets. And again, as a Marine, you didn't really have any respect for the Rangers. It's the common talk in the Marine Corps all the way through my training. Rangers are glorified infantrymen. They're just Marines in the Army. That's it. That's the difference. Bro, yeah, it's not that simple. So I go talk to all these recruiters. All these recruiters start lying to me. I've already played this game. I already put people in the Marine Corps. So I already know how this game works. And
that's right. You was good.
Yeah. So I'd already, on my own, I just assisted recruiting because I was hoping to get points toward promotion, which would have ended up screwing me. And this is something else I forgot to mention. So I'm a Lance Corporal at the time, and me and my Betty are both the two that were going to get the 300 PFT score. And that was the only thing that was going to separate us. We both had the same rifle score, everything else. He ends up getting a 300. They don't count 4 of my pull-ups. Okay, I guess they weren't perfect form. I wasn't kipping, but somehow they didn't count. So I end up getting 16 pull-ups. He gets 20. And I won a 1710, and he ends up like 1759. And so he ends up getting promoted ahead of me. And so it was between us as who was going to get promoted next. He ends up getting promoted. I don't. And if I would have got promoted, then it wouldn't have been as easy to let me leave because of numbers. I forget how the recruiter explained it to me, but it was just like, because if you're an NCO, which in the Marine Corps, E4, you're a corporal, you're an NCO now. Once you transition to NCO, it's different than just a low level private PFC Lance Corporal. So luckily, I didn't end up getting promoted. So I ended up transitioning from a Lance Corporal, E3, to Army PFC, not the same rank. And so I ended up finding all the recruiters lied to me in the Army, except for one recruiter. I already had a list of 7 or 8 questions. I already knew the answer. I already knew they would lie about every one of them because it's all things that would be not good. It wouldn't look favorably on the Army, especially if you're coming from a different branch, but they didn't know I already knew the answers to all these. So every single recruiter in the state of Oklahoma lied to me on almost all of them. One guy didn't. I went to talk to him. Luckily, it was in Oklahoma City, not far from me. I go talk to him. The whole time I'm talking to him, he's talking to this guy. I'm asking him, he's asking him, he's telling him, he's telling me. I'm like, how about I just talk to this guy? He's like, oh, okay, actually, I got to go to lunch. So I talked to this guy. My recruiter, who just happened to be the guy who answered the phone, is a land surveyor in the Army. He has no idea about special forces, about the Rangers, about anything. The guy sitting across from him is top 10% of special forces. And so at 10 years in, he's required to be a recruiter or a drill sergeant. And he refuses to be a drill sergeant. So he's a recruiter. And he's not recruiting anybody. He's going to sit there and play on his computer until he's done, until he can go back to his real unit. And so he just shot it straight with me, told me everything, the truth. And so I ended up getting, finally, long story, but I ended up getting the Special Forces 18 X-ray. I was the first person, they told me, I was the first one to sign the 18 X-ray in Oklahoma City because that contract just came out. And I took the D-Lab, Defensive Language Aptitude Battery, to see if I could pick up a foreign language. I failed miserably. And so they're like, oh, you failed that, so you got to sign with the Army. I'm like, I'm sorry, what? And the recruiter now is all cocky. He's like, yeah, you got to sign a different contract. And I'm like, well, I'm in the Marine Corps. What are you talking about? He's like, yeah, but you have to sign with the Army now. I'm like, I don't have to do anything. I can just sit here and deploy my unit. I don't have to, the contract you just offered me, you're not giving me. And so he got all butt hurt. I got butt hurt. I wasn't taking anything from land surveyor. And so he ends up just kind of being a jerk to me now. I get it. He just wanted an easy number, and I was going to be an easy number. And I was like, all right, well, you got to find me something equivalent or harder. And he's like, well, I don't know whether we're and I was like, okay, find me something to get into the Rangers, find me some other support thing that works directly in Special Forces that doesn't require a D-Lab. I don't know. You figure that out. I'm not a recruiter. And so he ends up, throwing stupid games at me. Well, you could be this infantry unit in the White Bar Army Ranger School. Okay, that's not the same thing, moron, and I'm not a moron. And then he calls me at like 6 a.m., wakes me up. I'm working 16 hours a day at the time. I had been working 16-hour shifts as an EMT, because again, I'm going to be a firefighter, as an EMT and a security guard at this huge food warehouse factory. And they kept having people getting destroyed with equipment and all kinds of stuff. So I'm working like crazy. Well, I quit my job September 12th because I'm like, I'm going to war, guys. Like I'm out. So I go home. I'm on my parents' couch now, and I'm just training 5 hour, basically 4 to 5 hours a day. I just worked out straight. That's all I did. And I'm just waiting for the call that's when I find out we're not leaving for 18 months. So that's where I'm at physically. That's where my mind is. So I'm furious because I've been working out like crazy. And finally he calls and says, hey, there's a contract here. Just came across my desk. You're probably not going to want it. It's Ranger, but it's forward observer. I was like, I'm sorry, say that again. He's like, Ranger forward observer. I was like, okay, you didn't tell me Rangers have forward observers. And he's like, oh, like you're interested, or you just being a dick? I was like, bro, as far as I know, forward observers are freaking cool. So yeah, actually I am interested in that. I still don't know what they do in the Rangers, and I will definitely want to find out. But yeah, let's definitely do that contract. So I'm elated that I'm going to finally do something. Fast forward to I'm wearing a tan beret. I've graduated from Ranger indoctrination program. I'm beat to crap. I've survived the grueling test to get into the regiment. And at the last night before you're taken off, like I'm not wearing the beret at that, but like we had already we're graduating the next morning, and they let you ask questions the night before, and they're like, "Hey, who's got a question?" I'm like, "There's like 2 of us in the class. What does a forward observer do?" Like, "Oh, you have a cool job, okay, idiot." He's like, you get to carry a radio, so that's going to be fun for you. A lot of extra batteries, that will also be fun. Like, yeah, you're going to be in the stack. You're going to get to be essentially like infantry, but you got to carry the radio, and you're going to get to call in everything there is. Jets, Hellfire missiles. You're going to be calling in spooky Spectre gunships. You're going to be calling in Blackhawks. Anything you can imagine, that's what's at your disposal in the Ranger Regiment. And I'm just like, what? Like, I had no idea, because all the way through Forward Observer School, everything is artillery, everything's regular Army. And so I have no idea what I'm going to do. All I know is everything I just learned was stupid, because we're not even going to use artillery in the Ranger Regiment. So I felt like, well, crap, I just wasted all this time going through training, and now I still am not even going to know what I'm doing when I show up. They're going to have to train me from day one, only I'm going to be, getting hazed and beat while learning all of it. So that is exactly how it happened. But I still had to remember everything field artillery, because if you're a Ranger, you have to be the best at everything that you do. So if anybody could ever, outdo you at artillery, then you would be, the laughing stock of the regiment. So you have to have everything memorized in the book, in the field manual. You have to be able to do call for fire. Essentially, you have to be able to, here's the mission, there's the target, go. You pick up the radio, you key the mic, and you start spitting. This is when we're figuring out the math in your head of where the round is going, is while you're making the communication talk. And the idea is you need first round fire effect on the target. And so that's the standard they beat into your head. That's what they want. You need to be able to hit the target that smooth, that fast in practice, because in real life, it's not going to be this calm and smooth and everything. So you got to be able to do it. Yeah, we're going to go run, and we're going to go do a bunch of stuff right before we do this stuff. But that's just to get your heart rate up, to get you amped up to what it's really going to be like. So when the time came, and I'm on a dual mission, and I'm not the forward observer, because my sergeant and the LT were the ones who wanted to do this mission. They trying to remember that, and this was in the book. This was in the book Task Force Black. So I actually was reading that book, TF Black, which I'm sure you can buy the book on Amazon. So it's the British SAS that we worked with. We weren't allowed to say that they were Task Force Black, but hello, it's on Amazon, it's on Wikipedia, everybody knows it now. So we're working with them, and so they wanted my higher ups want to work with them. Well, their radios, for whatever reason, their frequencies don't communicate with each other. So I can hear the sergeant and I can hear the lieutenant, but they can't hear each other. And so I'm sitting here with 2 radios listening in on the mission, and we got Spectre, and he's flying over a terrorist training camp, and they're shooting rounds. Some terrorists come out, and they're, trying to just shoot into the darkness because they don't know where anybody's at. And so I key up and I talk to each one of them, and so I relay the information back and forth between them on that mission. And again, it's not like I did something special at all. But what I realized after it had happened, and I thought about it, I was like, I wasn't all amped up like what I always thought it would be like on a real mission. And you actually have to key up the radio, and you're going to actually talk. And, if you say the wrong number, he's relaying information numbers, and this guy has the wrong numbers. You relay that wrong, you literally can drop bombs on the wrong spot. two special forces guys, no, one special forces guy ended up accidentally, he changed out the batteries on his GPS, something during a mission, is the way it was told to me in the Ranger Regiment at the time. And so when he had sent the numbers, he didn't double check them, and they were calling in danger close, and he ended up dropping bombs on himself because the numbers were incorrect, but he didn't check them, right? And that was just a one-off thing that they use as an example. Like, every single time that we're conveying numbers over that radio, it has to be perfect. If we're doing this in training and it's not perfect, I'm going to destroy you, because one number makes the difference between life for them or death. More important than the life or death for you, because if you screw up and you kill yourself, cool, we're going to use you as an example of what everybody else should not do. But if you kill one of them, you have to live with that. Their family has to live with that. That's kind of what's beat into your head, especially when you're in a position that's not just, infantry. When you're doing something that could kill a bunch of your buddies, and every mission we're going to be doing is going to be danger close, because we're not doing long range stuff at that point. And especially as the war progressed and we start doing house to house and snatch and grab missions, you're not doing World War II style. You know where they are, they know where you are, and you're just launching volleys at each other. So,
So from here, tell me about your transition into law enforcement. So you did federal correctional officer. Was there anything else?
So I became a police officer. The only reason I became a police officer as a civilian was because I got out of the Ranger Regiment. I had been working with the FBI. We worked with all kinds of, federal law enforcement over there during the war. People don't know that they're there. They are.
Yeah.
So the FBI bomb dog handler dude that I was working with, we had some ATF dudes. We had the FBI, U.S. Marshals, Secret Service, of course. That guy gets $150K tax-free, and he does a nothing. He literally sits on the back of our truck. He lets his dog off the leash. It runs around. It sits down, and then it comes back to him. And he's like, yeah, that's where the bomb is. And so I'm like, how in the world do you get that job? And he opened the chow. He's like, well, with a background 4 combat deployments at that point with the Ranger Regiment, he's like, your first was the invasion of Iraq. And, and I get to kind of know him again, because I'm, working with him pretty closely, and I let him know about the, again, it's kind of one of the publicly well-known, the Jessica Lynch mission. And again, I'm just a dude that was on the mission, right? I'm not somebody who did something amazing, but just being a part of history, right? Being there, getting to firsthand live through history. He's like, dude, with all the things you've done, they're gonna eat that up. You apply, you have to get a degree. And I'm like, okay, I already want a degree. That was my whole plan originally. But now I'm like, okay, I could get a degree, then I could get in to any of the federal law enforcement groups that are working with us. Doesn't really matter to me anyway which one it is. And then I can come back over, and that's what he's like, if you've already deployed, they're going to be like, yeah, absolutely. You're the one who needs to go back to Iraq, not newbie, Bruce over here wants to go to Iraq to check a box to feel cool in the bar. If you've been there 4 times, you're the one that's going to get picked for that team. So he's like, just get out, get your degree, apply. And honestly, you'll be working with me. I'm sure before this war is over. And that was my plan. So I got out to go back to get that contractor money, but not be a contractor, because Blackwater at that time, Blackwater's happening, Triple Canopy's happening. But I had always just pictured, how the risk versus reward. And so I'm just like, you know what? I would rather be in a federal law enforcement agency, just like in the Rangers. I was like, I'd rather be in special ops if I'm going to go to war than to be a regular soldier. And I say that with a ton of respect for everybody who served, obviously. But again, this is my mindset when I'm thinking of it as a young kid, and war is now on the precipice when I never thought I would have war in my lifetime. I mean, especially the way that Desert Storm went, right? As a 10-year-old watching it on TV, 10 years old, it was over in 72 hours as far as I remember. So that was where I thought of as war, what a war would be with a bunch of cave dwelling terrorists who, attack buildings with planes. It's not like they had a big military force, right? So anyway, so what I'm saying is that was my whole mindset at the time, and it proved true. So I go over special ops, and unfortunately, I see your standard military units being the ones that are going out on regular patrol, and they're the ones that are getting hit with IEDs. Meanwhile, we have 0 hits with IEDs. Now, keep in mind, our vehicles are completely stripped. We don't want armor on our vehicles at all. We have no armor whatsoever. All we have is extra gun ports. It's a dune buggy. It's a Humvee with a rolled-on bed, so you could add more Rangers with more guns. That's it. It's just teeth. It's rolling teeth. That's it. If you shoot at us, you're gonna die. And how we didn't get hit with IEDs is we worked at night. We never worked during the day. And if we had to go out during the day, we're flying up in a Black Hawk, way out of the range. So that's my experience. That's what happened when I went through the war, and I watched as regular units, and especially reserve units, were being sent out to do a patrol. Then they would get hit with IEDs, they'd get ambushed. Then they would call in special operations, they'd call in special forces units, they'd call in, airstrikes, whatever, to go deal with these terrorists that are there. And we were only focused on going after the deck of cards and the 1 through 10. We're only focused on we're in the task force. So we're only focused on the worst guys in the deck of cards. So in my estimation and my experience, I want to be on the side where the money's there, I'm valuable, to the point to where, yes, I'm going to do something that I may not come home from, that the chances that I could come home are high enough. And again, as I lived through a couple of those where probably not coming back from this, or one where they're like, you're not coming back. Send your letters, you're not coming back. Just know, not happening. You're not coming back. SEAL Team 6, DevGru says, no, we're not going on that mission. That's stupid. That's suicide. Delta Force says, no, we're not doing it like that. And our intel is this is the only time we know this guy's going to be here. We have to get him during daylight hours. We only know of this one place that he's going to vanish. And he's building a cement truck full of explosives. The cement truck is going to level 6 city blocks, and he's going to park it right in front of the police headquarters and the Capitol, where we just input our guy, right? So that's that mission I came back from. And from that, I'm eternally grateful, that happened that way. But it also reinforced that if you were valuable and you're with other people that are valuable, there's a good chance that they're going to put you in a position where you could still succeed. So that was my mindset going toward the route that I was going to go. Becoming a civilian law enforcement, I actually was working a pretty easy job, not making a lot of money, but also only having to work, 30, 35 hours a week doing it and going to school full time. And then somebody was like, hey, you want to take the PT test for the police department? I was like, what, here? And he was like, yeah. He's like, I'm going on Friday. And I was like, I mean, I don't think I could do that and still go to school full time. He's like, of course you could. You just work night shift and then go to school during the day. And I was like, well, that would help me toward, if I'm already law enforcement and I'm getting paid but way better and I'm getting, more experience, especially with pistols, because everything I'd ever done was with rifles, and calls for fire, not pistols. So I end up taking the PT test. My buddy who convinced me, he fails. I set a new record for the runtime. And again, not something amazing. It's not amazing. But they hadn't had a lot of fast runners come through that police department. So I of course, they put a little mark by my name when I smoke everybody on the PT test. And, and everybody shakes my hand and actually talks to me. Whereas a lot of guys, they just kind of let you leave. And then I go to take the written test. I pass that. I go sit down for the actual interview. And it was kind of like not a board, but it was like there's several people in the room and they're asking you a bunch of hard questions and they're yelling at you and screaming at you and trying to make you rattled. And I'm just like, all right. I mean, I would do. And he's like, what would you do if you're a training officer? You guys come out of Walmart and you see him putting stuff inside the vehicle. I'm like, I mean, I would assist him in taking it out. And they're like, well, you can't do that. This guy has, he can throw, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I mean, I'm a pretty convincing person. I think I could talk him out of it. And he's getting more and more angry and he's getting more red-faced and he's starting to cuss at me. And I'm like, I understand what you're saying, sir, but I'm telling you is that it just wouldn't happen. So we don't really have to worry about it because that's not ever going to happen. And I already told you what I was going to do. It's not going to go forward where I'm going to convince him or I'll physically do it. I'm not scared of another officer. And he's like, would you tell on him or not? And I'm like, oh, I was like, well, I mean, if I have zero other recourse, of course. And he's like, he sits down all red-faced. And I'm just sitting there like, wow, that dude got really worked up. I get up, I leave. The other guy that didn't talk in the room, he ends up shaking my hand. He was one of the detectives, ended up being a good buddy. And he's like, hey, man, did good. And I was like, that dude hates my guts. I don't know what they're talking about. So I go out. My mom, of course, can't wait. So she had already called. I said, hey, Mom, I did not get that job. That guy hates my guts. I was like, he hated everything I had to say. And she's like, oh, really? Well, no big deal. Da, da, da. Well, they call and they're like, yeah, job offer. This is when you start. Da, da, da. This is when you go through the academy. And I was like, are you sure that you got the mail right? Because I'm really sure that the captain hates my guts. I think you're getting the wrong guy. That was their way of trying to rattle people. And evidently, I'm sure it rattles everybody. Unless you've been in combat a few times.
They do that same question over here in California too.
Oh, do they?
Yeah. It must be everywhere.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They used to ask stupid things like, why are manhole covers round? Right? They tried to do stupid questions like that. But yeah, so that's how I ended up being a police officer, just because I thought it would help me get toward my ultimate goal. Long story short, I'm 3.5 years in, I get my degree. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to apply to at that point, I'm thinking the FBI because I had learned about HRT. I really learned from especially the buddies that I do know that work closely. Of course, we work closely with DevGru and our Delta Force, and then DevGru, some of my buddies who work close with them. A lot of those guys ended up going to HRT, and that was kind of a not a fishery, but kind of really a home for if you had been in special ops, specifically those units, PJs, the top tier, tier 1 units. But also, of course, your Ranger Regiment guys. And because we were tier 3 at that point when the tier system was very clear cut. So I start focusing on that. And right at that point, I finally was able to max the PFT. My goal was to be able to max the PFT for the HRT, which is not easy because I already had the long distance running, but you got to be able to sprint. I've never been a sprinter. And so I'm finally able to do the 300-meter sprint in 40 seconds. It was less than that. It was close to 40 seconds. So I finally hit it. I'm finally able to max the test. And they had another exam come up. I went and took the test. And I knew the lady. I didn't know her, but I worked with her husband that gave me the FBI test. And so I didn't talk to her beforehand, but my buddy, who's a paramedic out on the street, and he's like, yeah, my wife would be the one giving me the test. I was like, oh, that's awesome. He's like, yeah, her name is, blah, blah, blah. I was like, okay, yeah, I recognize that from my paperwork. She's one of the people that I talked to at the recruiting function that they were at OU. So I go take the test. Everybody in there is college kids who just graduated. They have no life experience. I'm showing up all grizzled and ugly and, hair falling out and still trying to cling on to having hair back then. And I finished the test, first one to finish the test. The test is it's no longer the treasury exam. Now the Obama administration, this was 07, or 07, 09, summer of 09 is when I graduate. I started in 07, ended in 09, 2 years. I end up taking the test. They had changed the exam to be a what would you do in this instance test. So now instead of you actually just needing to be a smart person or having some common sense or, some just basic engineering understanding, now it's what would you do in this instance? And so I'm like, this is the easiest thing I've ever taken in my life. Obviously, I wouldn't do that. Obviously, I would do this. Obviously, I wouldn't do that. And I go through it and I'm like, okay, here we go. Turn that in. She's standing out in the hallway and I went up to her. I was like, hey, just so you know, I'm Officer Ryan. I was talking with your husband. And she's like, oh, okay. So you're the one. And I was like, yeah. And I was like, hey, quick question. I was like, so that was the easiest test I've ever taken. I was like, yeah, I didn't learn, but I looked back at my answers. I obviously wouldn't change a single one. And she's like, well, what was your background? I understand you're law enforcement. I was like, yeah. So I was in the Marines. She's like, oh. I was like, what? She's like, I've never had a Marine pass this so far. I was like, then I was in Army Special Operations. She's like, I've never had anybody in Special Ops pass it either. I was like, are you serious? She's like, and I've never had an active law enforcement officer pass it. And I'm like, so what? Why would you guys root out? She's like, I'm just administering the test. I'm just telling you that the results that I'm getting are a lot of veterans are going to put answers that are going to be the ones that the FBI doesn't want to see. And I'm like, I've heard that a lot of FBI agents in the recent couple of years have been getting in trouble for not carrying their firearm on them. Is that true? Are you guys actively now screening for people who are not really fans of law enforcement or firearms? She's like, I can't say for sure. She's like, but yeah, I know that is a common theme. She's like, we're going after white collar crime. So that's what our focus is right now as a agency. So unfortunately, that's weeding out a lot of guys, with your type of background. So of course I failed the test. And with the FBI at that point, you could only take the test twice with that test because it's what would you do in this instance? So if you take it again, you're just trying to game the system. So if you took it and changed your answers the next time, because it's the same exam, it'll be a different test number, but it'll be the same type of questions. You're going to put the same thing. Here's for the question. One of the questions with 4 answers, and I'm going to butcher it, but this is basically it. You're in a bank. You have your badge. You've got your gun, but you're in plain clothes. It's your day off. You get robbed. The bank gets robbed. You get down on the ground with everybody else. Then you would do what? And the answers are, A is I would jump up, announce FBI, I would pull out my badge and my gun, and I would subdue all of the criminals. Number 2 is I would lay there, I'd be a good hostage, but I would try to keep my ear open for names, for words, for anything that would help me to identify them. I would not look at them directly. You're going to do the smart thing. You're going to get as much detail in your brain as you can. You're not going to be just sitting there panicking, right? When they leave, and this is the key to the answer, when they leave, you would get up, go to the window, and try to see what they were driving in a direction of travel. C was like eat a hamburger. Like C was if you didn't even read the question and you didn't know where you were that day and you just wrote something, like it was a question that was made that nobody would ever answer, but somebody clearly had written it down at some point. It was something stupid like that. Like it's had nothing to do with anything. And I don't understand that one, but I've seen that on multiple types of tests. Then the last one was I will just be completely passive. I wouldn't do anything. I would just be a completely passive hostage. Okay? So obviously I didn't pick that one, but that was obviously the only answer. So you got 2. Obviously you're not jumping up and being John Wayne. They're definitely not wanting that. So what they want is you just be completely passive. Don't try to pay attention. Don't try to put yourself into a good position if you need to. Don't try to help anybody. Don't try to help law enforcement catch these people afterwards. You just, maybe wet your pants too so you can blend in. Like, that's what the FBI wants at that point. So I was like, okay, so no matter what I do with my life, holy crap, I didn't expect this. So I'm blown out of water. Now Rife's backhands me again and is like, well, you're not doing that. What do you want to do next? And I'm like, a bunch of other people were like, well, let me introduce you to some other people who are I knew a guy he trained the CBP pilots, the Customs Border Protection. He trained them. So he goes around and actually takes me to meet the head of the ATF, the head of the Secret Service. I didn't get to meet the head of the marshals, but I got to meet some marshals, and I'd worked with marshals as a police officer anyways. And from that, and border protection, of course. And from that, I decided that the ATF was probably the route that I was going to go. But again, I would be happy with any of those. But the Secret Service, I was like, I don't really want to live in DC. I don't really want to protect the types of presidents that we're typically getting and we're going to be getting. So, but it would be great to be a part of that. So I'm still thinking all that is still kind of wide open, but I don't really know how to get into them. I keep applying, but they keep closing. The ATF opened and closed without hiring a single person for it was over 2 years. They opened it and then closed it, and I would just get the email. It's open. I'd apply. It's closed. We didn't hire anybody, and we're not going to reopen for another, whatever the maximum length of time until they reopen it. So what I found out is you could get into another federal law enforcement group, and then you could transfer in. So anybody getting into the ATF, anybody getting into the marshals, they're all being transfers. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, how could I get it? What other groups could you get into? Somebody says, well, at Tinker Air Force Base, right down the road from Oklahoma City, you could get on there. They're hiring federal police officers. So technically, you're federal law enforcement. You're in the federal system. Then you can apply to transfer. And so I go and I take the written test and I take the PT test, set a new record like that. Again, not anything to write home to them about. Super slow compared to where I was in high school. But I do well on the PT test, so they make a note. And so they want to hire me. And I tell the guy straight out, he's like, so you want to use us as a stepping stone to get to federal law enforcement? I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. I was like, I'm not trying to play games. I don't think it'll happen immediately, obviously. But I will be the best, I'll be the best police officer I can possibly be for you while I'm here. And he's like, okay, that's fine with me. And so he ends up hiring me. I end up going through their academy. And then at the end of it, find out that he was lying the whole time. We're federal police officers, but we're not federal police officers at all. We're not going to do any police work. We're going to sit on the gate and check ID cards. And I was like, no. You specifically told me we are not doing, that's not what I was hired to be. I was hired to be federal police officers. You're making me a gate guard. And so I immediately transferred. I think I was there for 2.5 months from the start date to the end of my 2 weeks notice. And I was one of the last guys. Like, everybody else had already quit, like, immediately. So there was almost nobody left because the guy just kept lying to everybody to try to get people to come in because nobody wanted to be a gate guard. But he had somehow finagled that he could put it on USA Jobs as a federal police officer, even though you don't get credentials. You're not going to actually be a GL. You're not going to be the right pay grade. So you can't be a transfer. And then one of my buddies was like, hey, I know a guy who's at the federal prison in El Reno, Oklahoma. And he's like, that's only a few more miles away. That's definitely federal law enforcement. You go through the academy, you get to go through Glencoe, Georgia, you get to go through FLETC, and then you can transfer in 100%. I was like, okay. I apply and nothing. And then once I worked at Tinker and I was in the federal door, literally the day that I got my CAC card, then I reapplied for the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And that moment is when my application showed up at the Bureau of Prisons. It was getting stuck in the system. It would show up. As soon as I hit that, I didn't change anything else on my resume. I didn't change any questions. I didn't change anything. In a second that I was in the federal system, I immediately popped up. They hired me, and that's why it took 2 months. I ended up getting hired there. It took 2 months to go through their hiring process. Never wanted to be a prison guard. But I will tell you this, imagine right now, or imagine tomorrow, you're going to get up in the morning. You're going to just put on your regular clothes, nothing special. You're going to go get in your car and you're going to go to prison. And you're going to go hang out inside a prison where everybody else is locked down, looking for a way out, wanting to kill each other, wanting to do horrible things to each other, doing anything they can to get over on you, trying you all the time. You're going to go do that. And then you're going to leave prison. They're going to let you out, probably. And you're going to go home and then sleep and play with your kids. And you're going to go eat at a nice restaurant. And then you're going to go back to prison the next day. And oh, by the way, if the prisoners ever get too angry, then they can do anything they want to you. And there's nothing you can do about it, because you're locked inside the prison with them. When you're in the housing unit, regardless, there's too many of them. But when you actually are the officer at night, when you're working the housing unit, they lock you from the outside. You can't get out if you wanted to. You just have to lock yourself into your little office with a little wooden door. Like that's going to stop an entire 278 inmates. And I just watched them do the bench press competition, and I know 6 dudes in my unit bench over 500. And Billig didn't even bother going out because he destroys everybody every time he competes. So he just let everybody have a good day. Like that's what it's really like to be inside a prison. And oh, by the way, most of your coworkers that have been there, not the new guys that you came in with, most of those guys, they're not the type of people that you want as lifelong friends. I'll put it like that. They're not people who make a lot of good decisions. They tend to be people who, in my experience, this is El Reno, Oklahoma, when I was there, they're dudes who are looking forward every day. Their dream is the $11,000 a year. Remember, this is real time money. This is now time money. Well, not Biden money, but before that crazy inflation went up, it's $11,000 is what you were looking at, 17 technically, but then they start whittling that away. Roughly, we were going to make about $11,000 as your retirement as a federal law enforcement. If you don't go to be a lieutenant, you don't go across the line to the dirty side as they think of it, right? So you're just going to work as a regular officer your whole career. You're not going to move up into the management side of it. And that's what you're looking forward to. Everybody thinks they're going to just buy a house, pay a 30-year mortgage, work in federal law enforcement for 30 years, pay that house off, and then, 11,000 is all I need. And I met, there's 3 different guys who literally cashed out their retirements and sunk it all into, and we're trying to get all of us to do it too, into Iraqi dinar. I'm not joking. I'm talking like probably $100,000 plus that's in their thrift savings plan through the Federal Bureau of Prisons that's been building for many, many years. And they took all of it and cashed it out. And they drove, because you can't buy it just regularly. You could go to some banks and they would give you small amounts. But they believe that even though Iraqi dinar is not traded on the world stage as a currency, period, it's useless. It's paper. It's just paper mache. They believed that because of the Iraq war, that America was going to back Iraq and we were going to stand up an Iraq country, and it was going to be on the world stage. And if you did that, your money was going to be 1,000 to 1, whatever it was. So if you spend $100, you're getting 100, whatever it was, like 100 and something thousand Iraqi dinar, just to make them happy, because you have to make everybody happy when you're in there too. I went out and I didn't want my tires slashed in the parking lot. I'm not joking. So I went out and went to the bank, gave them whatever it was, like $50. They gave me 100 and whatever thousand Iraqi dinar. I still have it, and I laugh about it every time I see it. But they literally 3 dudes cashed out all their retirement, everything they had, and went to to Houston, Texas, I believe, to meet with Pitbull. Pitbull. This dude's legit name that he gave them is, my name is Pitbull. And they're going to go give this guy each probably 100,000 plus in U.S. currency, all the retirement. And he's going to give them billions of Iraqi dinar. And unfortunately, while I was there, officers committed suicide. That's a real thing. And these people who make terrible decisions like that, like you already know, and it's one of the horrible things while you're there. You're like, man, I could see this guy's probably, he's going to be one of the statistics that, right? You only have 5 years to live after you get out of law enforcement, according to the statistics, because law enforcement officers across the board tend to end up taking themselves out, or of course, with all the stress we put ourselves through, die of a heart attack, die of a, something related to that, right? Something related to the job. And that's, again, if you don't get killed in the line of duty, of course. But after retirement, like, you got 5 years. And again, one of those statistics happened while I was there. One of the girls, she'd been there for like 18, 19 years. No, longer than that, because I think you could retire at 20, but you stay for a little bit longer, you make more money. She was waiting for more money, but she could retire at any time. And she ends up just, eating her gun before work, and did it and left it so that, somebody has to come find her, and and I'm at work waiting for relief, and then we find that out, and it's just like, this is not what I want to do with my life. I'm really tired of being here and still not getting, I'm not any closer to the ATF, to the to U.S. Marshals, to FBI HRT. I don't know what I should do. My cousin, who didn't graduate high school, is, making $90K living on oil rigs. So I literally sneak out to an oil rig, checked out what it was like to live on an oil rig. And I knew I didn't want to be a roughneck. And I had at that point, I had my bachelor's degree, and I had started the master's program, but I wasn't close to finishing that. And I was like, if I could start making six figures, I would definitely go live on an oil rig. And that's how I ended up leaving the federal prison system, was just like, hey, I can make more money than the warden tomorrow, so I'm going to go do that while you guys are buying Iraqi dinar and, and taking your own lives, and then eating each other. Every day it was somebody's attacking somebody else. Everybody's making rumors up that I said something, or that this dude said something. And that they're berating who is in this unit as hooking up with this inmate. This guy is banging this guy's wife, who also works here in the cafeteria. And it's just this terrible, it was just a terrible environment mentally to even be around for me. Again, there were some solid dudes that I came in with, and there were some really solid guys that were there, but there was too many toxic people around. And again, the path up just didn't look too rosy to me. So that's how I ended up leaving that, why I've ended up on the path that I have. And I'm in Miami right now doing assessments on properties. I got to go out tonight to a property and assess their lighting, their security protocols, their camera systems, and basically tell them how to have a safer property for these people. At the end of the day, now living through all the things I've lived through, I just want to spend every day that I can with my family. And although they're not here with me right now, they can be with me, and they will be. But I ended up having to do IVF. My wife and I were married for 13 years and had never even once, had a positive pregnancy result. And that's why I went to be a private contractor. I literally was like, I have a skill set that I could go make six figures right now, and I can save all of it because you're living at the compound. You're sending all of it home. I could pay off all my bills. I could get us out of any credit card debt that we have, pay off all the vehicles. All we owe is on the house. Then we're going to stash all the money away for IVF. That's exactly what we did. And my son's name is Archer. He's 16 months old now. And, if he decides that he's not going to be a Marine, he just has to tell his combat veteran mother, Marine mother, that he wants to be in the Air Force, So that's what I always tell people. Now, he definitely doesn't need to follow our footsteps. But we want a bigger family too. We ended up doing IVF, and we ended up with more than we anticipated, because they always say 3 = 1. That's the math equation for IVF, is 3 embryo transfers before your first live birth is what you should anticipate. That's what we're hoping for. And so don't plan on this first one sticking. We put the first one in, he sticks. Okay, well, don't get ahead of yourself. We understand it's exciting, but I wouldn't announce it to everybody. And they're cautioning you the whole time, because they've seen it a million times. And it just keeps growing, and everything keeps coming healthily, and every marker they're looking for, he's right there. He ends up, she ends up giving birth to him. No issues, no complications. I ended up having birth defects that I never knew I had, and I didn't find out until I was in law enforcement. And it wasn't until my pistol belt and all of my radio and everything pulling on my waist down, as pulling my spine apart, that it started messing with my spine. And I went and got a bunch of CAT scan, all the different tests, because not one of them wouldn't show you, but if you put all 3 together, then you could see there was holes in the back of my spine that just weren't there. They weren't formed. So I had spina bifida. Never knew that. But I'd done all these things with it, and I'm still kicking, still running, still lifting every day. Not because I'm amazing, right? It's the lifestyle, though. I think law enforcement, military, especially, people that really take it very serious and stay with it afterwards. Which again, Marines, it's beat into you. It's beat into your DNA. Going and doing obstacle course races, right? Like Spartan races. I love doing stuff like that, because it's a lot of fun. And plus, I'll always meet somebody. When I go run a race, I'll end up running with somebody who's the same speed as me. And both times now, they've been older guys that are more impressive than me when it comes to physicality, because they're much older than me and they're keeping up with me and or doing better. And I'll end up running the rest of 9 miles of a 13-mile race, right? 10 miles of a 13-mile race with some stranger, and then crossing the finish line. And then we stay in touch. That's what I miss about that. That's what I miss about law enforcement too. Law enforcement is a different animal, though, I will say, because the military is so it's its own world. Law enforcement's like its own LA. It's like its own huge city. But military, like, you go onto a base and you're cut off from the rest of the world. They're cut off from you. You know what I mean? Like, it's a whole environment, much like prison. If you go in the prison, it's an environment. Everybody's cut off. You're cut off. It's the cesspool. That's where that goes. Law enforcement, it's a little bit more out there. You feel connected with other police officers. I always do, no matter where you're serving, no matter if you're in Podunk, Oklahoma, or you're LAPD, or you're riding around in Tampa, Florida, and I actually was able to work with, when I first moved to Florida, I ended up working with an A&E channel with the security company I'm working with right now. They ended up getting a contract. They needed somebody to do PSD and drive the camera crew for the A&E channel. It's not the A&E channel. It's right who they subcontract to. And so they ended up hiring us. And of course, my boss was like, I mean, you're kind of a shoo-in. If you want to do this, you're HR during the day, hiring people for the company and vetting everybody and doing all that, recruiting and HR, but you could do this at night. And he's like, I know you would love it. And I was like, yeah, heck yeah, I would. So that's what I ended up doing. So when they went to Tampa, Florida, if you ever watch that show, Night Watch on the A&E channel. And I plan to put this on a podcast too. I plan on kind of watching that show and then telling you in the background of like what it was really like that night, because we had armed standoff, we had SWAT team call outs, we had hostages, we had carjackings. We were always chasing stolen vehicles every night. There's stolen vehicles doing 100 plus. And I'm in a minivan loaded down with an entire camera crew, and I've got to protect all of them as they're running face first with the camera right into the line of fire. And I'm having to literally run and grab them and physically remove them from the line of fire because they didn't even think about it. This guy's up here with a hostage. SWAT team's all down behind shields and barriers, and he runs out and jumps in the middle and is doing that. Again, right? He doesn't have that. He's focused on getting the good shot. He just doesn't have the spatial awareness, understanding how much danger he's in. It wasn't until I physically jerked him over behind a vehicle, was like, well, he could shoot you while you're shooting him. And he's like, oh. And I was like, yeah, man, that's what it was. That's what it was like working with those guys, right? Immediately. I don't know them. They don't know my background, but the way I drive is the way they drive. The way they talk. I don't curse. I was beat as a child. We're very strict Christian raised, so I've never cursed in public. That got beat out of me as a child, and you were never going to curse, blah, 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 blah. So I just never have. And so as a police officer, though, it came in handy because anytime somebody came in and said, hey, this officer cursed me out, like, oh, Ryan cursed you out, did he? Go back and watch the film. Of course, they're cussing me like a sailor, and I'm just laughing. Just kind of, that's fine. And I called a kid a brat one time. They called me into the station, was like, we can't have you talking like that to citizens. I'm like, I said brat. This kid had 5 cars backed up while he's playing shooting hoops in the street. He just doesn't care. He won't move for them. He's just being a jerk. And they're like, yeah, but you can't call him a brat. I'm like, okay. You guys are dropping F-bombs all day, every day on the street, but I call a kid a brat. It was obviously a brat. That was the worst one I'd ever said. That was the only time I got in trouble for using language as a police officer. But it's I think there's just camaraderie with all law enforcement. I think when military prison guards, I think it's a little strange. It's definitely a different type of human that wants to do that type of work. But it's generational. And that was one thing that I did find fascinating. So many of the people that are there in the prison, their dad works in the same prison and or had worked in this prison at some point. Their grandpa retired from this prison. Their great grandpa had worked in the prison system. And you saw that with both sexes. Like you'd have girls going through the academy, their grandpa, their dad, their mom, they had all worked in the prison system. It was kind of weird. It's one of the strange ones where I don't think I've seen that. Maybe Marine Corps. I'd say the Marine Corps, I've seen a lot of generational following suit, but I think the prison system is the one that has them all beat, where if your grandfather is and your dad and your mom, well, that's where you're going, kid. Sorry. I don't know what you had plans for in your life, but you're going to live in a prison someday. So enjoy that.
I almost did that myself because all of my family are COs for the state of California.
Okay.
And my dad was, cousins, uncles. And then when I got out, that's kind of like my story. I got to tell people about all the time is how I got into law enforcement was because I was going to school and I was talking to the guy I had met who's working for the sheriff's office. And he's like, he's a Marine too. And he was like, so what are you going to do with your life? And I was like, probably be a CO. And then, but I'm super happy that he took me from that and transitioned me to a different path. Right. And then I went to the law enforcement path. But that would have been bad because everything you talked about with the whole being in the prison is the same thing when I talk with like my mom's husband or I talk to my dad or I talk to cousins. Like they all have that same mindset with this how it is in there, you know? And then being a cop and a detective and going into the prison myself, I don't even like being in there as long as there. It's just like a really shitty place. Even just going to the county jail to take someone to jail or doing investigations in the jail. It's just a very low energy, tight frequency, like place where it's like, how could you do this for year after year and retire? And no wonder why they want to, they just want to get that. Because here in California for a correctional officer, they can make pretty good money.
But they have to pay good to do that these days.
But it's just like at some point, it's like, is the money worth it? To me, it's like, no.
Yeah.
So,
but I will say this though, being a police officer and working in the federal specifically, because again, states can be very, very different. I would say this though, like you're a police officer on your daily beat. If you're in a part of a big city or where you're running a lot of calls and you got a lot of crazy stuff going on in your city, like you're getting to pull your gun multiple times on a daily basis. Right. I was raised like hearing all these stories, police officer, and he never pulled his gun out his entire, okay, cool, bro. I do that twice a shift at least. Right. And you're going on high speed chase. You're doing a I'm kicking the door in. That lady commits suicide, tried to barricade herself into she's trying to die. She's not trying to fake. She's trying to die. She's locked the doors. She hides where she's supposed to be from her friends, from her family. They all think she's supposed to be with the others. Nobody's going to figure this out. She's already OD'd on entire pill bottles of narcotics. She's going, and nobody's going to stop her. And I kick the door in. We go and we end up rescuing her. She ends up surviving. Like those moments, like I always want to go up as a kid and like save somebody. Like that was always, how I always saw myself as a fat kid with buck teeth, right? And growing up in Oklahoma. But when we get to do that for all, when you're on a street cop, you're getting to do that because this is a civilian, right? This is somebody who's going through a rough time, right? Or you're getting taken, a little girl who's got a big, huge black eye from her dad from last night. She shows up to school and he says she fell. We know she didn't, right? Type of thing. Whereas in the prison, like everybody's in here for something, not anybody in here innocent. And so it's in that way, it's very, very different between the type of environment. So even if when I went into the prison, at first, I didn't like being locked down at all. I didn't like not having a firearm, of course. But then I was like, I think it would be interesting because although the calls for service as a police officer, it's changing all the time. That keeps it interesting. That keeps you on your toes. But anything could happen to you out there. You can get ambushed. You can get ambushed by the cartel. They hung me out to dry. The Secret Service and the U.S. Marshals hung me out to dry one day. I'm one of the undercover detectives that's working with narcotics teams, goes out on the radio, hey, is anybody at this intersection or nearby can stop this car? I am. What do you need? There's this vehicle, blah, blah, blah. I see him right there. I'll get him. Pull him over. Guess who it is? I have no idea. Mexican guy, Mexican ladies. And I talk to them. She can speak English. They can't. Everything's fine. Write her a warning. Give it to her. You guys made an improper turn, whatever it was, and send them on their way. I take that information, go back to the parking lot where the detective's going to meet me. And here's the Secret Service. There's the U.S. Marshals and then the task force and those dudes that were there from the narcotics team. And I'm like, what's going on? They're like, the guy who just stopped is one of the head cartel in Mexico. It's one of their leading captains. His daughter has died, passed away in the U.S., and he's here for her funeral. That was the only opportunity we had to find out if he was in the car. Oh, okay. I hope that's kind of nice. It's good to know that now. Hopefully they don't have me on a list now. I have no idea. That was it. Those types of things where you're like, I have no idea what's in the back of this car. I don't know who this guy is. If that guy would have just had some dude with an AK spray me as soon as we got pulled over and then they drive off, whereas in the prison, it's a game because it's all gangs. But while I'm there, we get a race riot kicks off. Or if you've ever been in a prison when a race riot kicks off, it's wild. And I'm not saying like I wasn't there I wasn't there the second that it kicks off. That sucked, but I get to show up a few hours later. And although nobody got like taken hostage or anything like that. It really was a race riot where they really were after each other. They weren't trying to take over the prisoner to do any other things. They were just like, you disrespected us. We got to do this. Here's the deal. Stab, stabby, stab, stab. And so they all stabbed each other a bunch. And then that was the end of it. Right. So, but still it was the fact I'm going into work today. There's a race riot. And oh, by the way, they've all got their knives. They're all ready to go. And they just all stabbed each other up yesterday. So yeah, enjoy your shift. And I'm like, okay. And then, again, you're locked in there at night. You don't know. It's an old facility. You don't know if somebody's finally figured out how to make keys and get out of the cell and go snatch you up and stab you up. You don't know those things. You hear the stories from the other prisons from the other people you go through the Federal Law Enforcement Academy with, because again, their dad and their mom and their grandpa have all been there, and they got generational stories to share with you of Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, which was the most insane prison in the nation at that time. People are getting stabbed every single day, every day. No day passes without getting stabbed. And so we would go in every day and read a report of what Lewisburg inmate had stabbed another prison guard that day. And you're just like, how many guards do they have left? Or do you still show up with 2 wounds from the last 2 days you got stabbed, and you're still serving food and they're still stabbing you through the food tray? Like I don't understand how you still do that as a job. So, it's also addictive though, because where you even go to get that excitement? And when you're in that environment and you're relied upon as a team member, you feel like you're letting other people down if you did leave. And you've built this respect with these inmates, and you've got the housing unit to actually get along, and you've got these guys getting along because you've got respect from these guys and from these guys, and everything's running smooth. And that wasn't running smooth with the guy that was in here before. Then you start, right? Am I supposed to be to a point where I start liking the inmates, and I want to make sure the inmates have a good life while they're in here? I don't know. And you have all of those things going through your head, and I'm like, I just need to make money. I got to get out of this whole system. I just need to get into another career path. And but whenever people ask me about all these different things that I've done, like I say, I can talk about it for hours, because I didn't just get hired and do this or that, for a little while to check a box. And then I ended up moving on. I ended up staying, as a police officer for 3.5 years. I was in the prison for 2 years and some months. I forget. It was right at my 2-year mark is when oil field company finally hired me. And I would still be in the oil fields 100% if the oil fields didn't crash in 2014. I was in the oil fields when they crashed for the last time. It's kind of done this little tiny roller coaster, but it was skyrocketing when I was in. And it's just, the work just isn't there like it used to be when I was in. That work, more people died. More people around me died when I was working on an oil field, in the oil fields, than law enforcement, prison, special operations, in war. More dudes are dying on oil rigs. Now they're doing it, unfortunately, because they're being unsafe. They're trying to rush, and they're dying in horrific ways because big machinery doesn't care how little tiny flare person gets their hand caught. It's the end. And you're down here when something blows, you're done. Doesn't matter where you're standing, something's going to swing and hit you, and you're done. Almost had my hand ripped off by a tool that broke and fall, and I'm holding on to it, trying to guide it because I'm about to lay it down and take it apart and put a new one in. And it literally, right before it comes up out of the pipe to come down, it's just about that spot, and it breaks free up top, and it goes flying down. And luckily I just let go, and it went rocketing down. I don't know how fast, but fast enough that most people would have probably lost their hands. And there's a lot of dudes that, there's a lot more people who lose limbs than necessarily die. But yeah, I mean, everything that I've done has always been pretty exciting, and it leads to, you have a lot of stories, but not everybody gets to go home from those. And again, you get to tell fun stories. You can also tell fun stories with an eye patch and with one hand. But that's what I'm going to tell my son when the day comes that he is trying to decide what he's going to go into. And that's what I'd like to leave you with, because I got to get back to work, is that, when I'm talking to my own son one day, I'm going to tell him the same thing. You can do whatever you want, because I want you to be happy, and I want you to, do what you're good at, what you enjoy. It does not need to be in the steps of your mother or me or anybody else. And if you want to be the best ukulele player on the planet, I'm going to be at your reciters, or whatever those things would be called for a ukulele concert, if that's a thing. I want to support him in whatever it is that he does. I fear that with the stories that I have to tell and the experiences that I've lived through are gonna shift his interest, because I didn't grow up with that. I grew up with, you work at whatever construction company that will hire you, and if you get really lucky, you'll get hired at the military base at Tinker, and you can work doing construction there and make a lot of overtime. That's it. That's the top. And I was like, no, I'm going to be a firefighter. And that was something crazy. That was, for my family, that was the same as being an astronaut. I was going to go be a firefighter. But a lot of people have asked me, well, what do you think about being a police officer nowadays, today? And I struggle with answering that without having an entire podcast to answer it, because it's not a simple answer, and I certainly can't do it justice right now. But what I'll say is, when I was a police officer, it was different than it is now. And so I can't tell you what you should do, because what you're going to be dealing with is going to be different from what I dealt with. Although my department did a whole lot of things that I didn't agree with, and they were worried about liability, not about justice at all. They weren't worried about really nailing bad guys to the floor like they should be. And I'm talking about pedophiles. I'm talking about rapists. I'm talking about murderers, right? I'm not talking about Walmart, stealing. The evil things that I saw in law enforcement took a huge toll on me, and I was mocked in a good way. I was always kidded as they called me Officer Happy Smile Wave, because I was the only police officer on the department that rolled my windows down, that didn't wear sunglasses 24/7, and actually waved at people and smiled. And so people didn't even know what to do when I did that, because the whole department, tinted windows up, sunglasses on, do not make eye contact, don't wave, don't smile, don't even acknowledge them, because we want that as the aura of our department. We want everybody to know, you don't mess with us. You move it along. You go to Oklahoma City if you want to commit a crime. You go to Norman if you want to commit a crime. You don't do it here in Moore, Oklahoma. And I broke that mold. And for that reason, there was several officers that just didn't like me, because I was too nice. And because of that, when I went and dropped people off at the jail, I would regularly be thanked by the person that I had arrested. As I was leaving, they would be like, "Thanks, Officer Ryan." And the prison, the jailers are always laughing at me, because who gets thanked by the person that they just put in handcuffs and dropped off at the jail? Because I wasn't a jerk to them, because I let them make one phone call to come pick up their car. We're talking about people that have, that are late on fines, people that have, are going through a divorce, and there's something, they're behind on child support, so you got to go to jail because they haven't been paying for their kids. Got it, bro. But your car is getting towed, you're getting towed, and this is the only car you have. I know, because I can look at the clothes you're wearing. I can look at this car. You can't afford another car, and I'm just a decent person to you. And I'm just treating you like I would want to be if this was the worst day in my life. I would want somebody to at least acknowledge that I'm just a normal human like you are. Because you're a cop and you wear a badge doesn't make you a better person than me. And if I'm going through, and that's what I tell people too. I'm like, when I show up at a 911 call, it's the worst day in that person's entire life, and every emotion that they're going through and all of the baggage that they've had, it's all rolled up to the top, and I'm going to have to walk face first into this domestic where I am the last person they want to see. And it almost cost me my life. I got ambushed by a dude who had just got out of prison, Aryan Brotherhood dude. And they got into a fight. He pulls a gun, puts the gun to her head, and rips the phone out of the wall. This was when people had phones in the wall. And I show up by myself, and I'm not waiting for backup because I hear her scream. And so when I go through the door, he's already waiting with the pistol, finger on the trigger, and I can see the revolver. I can see the bullets. I'm dead if I go all the way in. My body just immediately ejected me. I sprinted outside. I start going through the door. I see it. I roll back out. I don't see her. She's not there. It's just him. He's ambushing me. And so I don't know where she is now. I don't know where the baby is, because they have a baby. And, luckily, again, I survive. He ended up not pulling the trigger. He ends up coming out and giving himself up, pretending like he was holding a remote control. Oh, you know what you want? I was just holding a remote. So I slam him on the ground, and I'm picking him up by his throat when my backup officer shows up and is like, dude, my camera's on. And I'm out of my mind. This guy just tried to kill me. And as far as I know, he'd already killed his girlfriend. And now he's going to pretend like he's going to play a game with me. And I'm losing it at that point, And so I would say that, like, that's what you got to understand, that you're going to go through that at some point. You're going to go through the worst possible scenario where you might get ambushed, where immediately after that, by the way, we're cuffing him, putting him in the car. She's attacking me. She's fine. She ran to the neighbor. Now she's attacking me for sending her man to jail. He just got out of prison. He's going right back. And she's attacking me. I just saved her life, and now she's attacking me. So I tell that story to people specifically because I'm like, you got to understand that when you protect people as a soldier, when you're protecting people as a Marine, you're protecting the people who burn flags, who want to spit on soldiers, you protect them more right to do a lot of things. I'm not saying I agree with any of them, obviously, but the fact that you don't get put in prison for a tweet, the fact that in America at the moment you don't get put in prison and denied bail and denied representation for anything that they decide up in the White House, that's important, and that's what you're signing up to put your life on the line to protect, is the things that you don't want to necessarily protect. You envision in your mind you're going to protect the baby from a burning building. It's not going to be the baby, and it's not going to be right. You're going to have to go snatch the guy who set the fire, and you're going to be pulling him out, not knowing it, and then he lives, and everybody that he set the fire burns down around them. Like, you got to understand that you're going to have to deal with things that aren't the way you imagined them in your brain. This isn't, you're not a knight in shining armor. It's going to be very dented and dusty and covered with a lot of scars if you're going through that over a long period of time. You got to have a bulletproof soul to go through law enforcement for an entire duration to retirement. And I have a really good buddy who just did that at Hillsborough County, and he just wrote a book, and he just laid it all wide open and kind of shared all the PTSD that he had been dealing with all these years that he had never spoken about because of the weakness, right? That you expect to be perceived as being weak for admitting that. And of course, we all know anybody who does speak up, they get hammered. That's my life experience anyways. And it's not necessarily hammered like the department comes down on you per se, even though that has happened to people. You're going to fairly impact because people do look down on that. Other officers look down on that. And that's a reality that you're going to have to look at before you go into it. And then when you're as a police officer, you need to reevaluate as you're going through, because when I became a police officer, I wasn't married. Then I got married, and how badly I was just mean and nasty to my wife, just responding. I don't want to hear it. She's wanting to argue about something. It's important to her. I could care less. The little baby that just died, like, we're going to argue about the sheets? Like, I'm screaming at her, like, what are we talking about? Get out of my face with this stupid crap you're talking about. She doesn't deserve that. But here I am, dealing with all the things that I just dealt with on the shift. And, and I still to this day, I don't have bad dreams. I don't have the PTSD things that everybody thinks of, flashbacks, hearing the noises, hearing siren. I don't ever have any of those, and I never have. All the things that I've been through. But what I do have is I've got a soul still, and I have definitely as a new father. It's you to be able to tap into those emotions, and I fear things that I was able to always just stop and just move forward. Now I can't do that. I'm a dad. I really feel those things a lot more so, as you can hear in my voice there. I used to never do that ever, especially as a police officer. But when that type of thing starts happening to you, you also need to really consider, talking to other people, talking to other officers, talking to people that, can help you through those things. And that, again, with my buddy Doug and his his example being a great one. Like he talked to his buddy who he had went through the academy with, and their entire time together, they had worked their entire time. They retired at the same time. He tells us on the podcast episode with me, and hopefully I don't butcher this, Doug, but he says, like, my buddy and I had seen a family burn in a car crash. All of them dies, all of them burned to death. And that was one of our very first calls right out of the academy. And we never spoke about that. And when we retired, he finally came to me and was like, I've been dealing with this entire time. This has been something that's haunted me, and I don't want to go too far because I don't know how, I don't want to embellish it too much, but it was just, it had really affected him. And he had, maybe some PTSD from that. But he had never, this is his best friend who he's serving with at the police department the whole time. And yet he never even spoke to him about it all the way. For all those years he carried that and never told a soul about it. And it wasn't until after he left law enforcement. And then, again, we're looking at the 5 years after, I think that's part of it. I think people have to start sharing those things, not when it's too late. You need to do that beforehand, before you're thinking about your service weapon as a possibility, and obviously in the veteran community, and especially special operations, guys are taking themselves out because they're, for various reasons. But, I think that's such a travesty for all of that hard work that person has put into their mind, body, and soul. And for that person to feel like the best thing that they can do is for them to eliminate themselves from the equation is really just a huge tragedy that I, feel very passionately about, even though I'm trying to save school children because there's so few people in that space. That's why I jumped into that one. But as you can tell, I love law enforcement, love my brothers and sisters in blue across the nation, and the way our society treats, the way I say this too is people will look back on the way that America's treated our police the same way that we now look back on the Vietnam War and how they treated Vietnam soldiers. It's you can literally get on killing by Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, also get on combat, because everybody should have to read those books to even graduate high school. And you need to understand that what doing to law enforcement officers and what they are being perceived as is the same thing that our nation did, calling soldiers who came back from being drafted into Vietnam baby killers and all of these horrible things, and putting an atrocity on them that they had no part of. And they just survived the most insane scenario of fighting a war where they're not even tied in with each other. And this guy shows up and this guy's got to go. And you're only here for a short time. So you're all about yourself. Like when he goes through and breaks down all of the failures in the planning of how that was put together, the draft and the Vietnam War specifically. It's insane to even think that somebody thought that was a good idea. And now here we are in our generation, and we're looking at how people are like, yeah, do fund the police, get rid of law enforcement. And then they're getting, attacked right and left, and they're getting assaulted, and they're getting murdered, and they're getting butchered, and their kids are getting sexually assaulted, all because nobody's there. Nobody good is left. All the good is left these areas, and now it's just evil is taken over. What do you expect is going to happen? You think it's going to be better now that somebody, who was sworn to protect isn't there? Now you think magically everybody's just going to start kumbayaing and getting along, and Portland found that out pretty fast, unfortunately, right? Again, because I'm sure there's a lot of kids up there that meant a lot of really good things when they thought of having a great society where there's no evil this or evil that, and then all of a sudden the wolves come in and they start picking people off, and all the assaults and all the craziness that happened. But I'm going to stop talking. I apologize. I get going like that.
No, I appreciate it, man. I love talking. I love hearing your stories and conversation. I love everything that you've done so far. I know you have to get to work. But before you get to work, is there anything how people could find you. I know your podcast, School to Embassy Project.
Yeah, school to embassy project. The meaning there, of course, if our schools were more like our embassies, if you try to attack an embassy, we don't even have to shoot you. We just trap you in between this door and that door. And then when you make it past that, we just trap you there. And it's not a scary looking building. The most dangerous place on earth, Baghdad, Iraq, not a scary looking building at all. It's actually a really, really cool design building. But nobody's going to bring a bomb or a machine gun or a flamethrower and really do much damage when you're trying to attack the embassy, because it's guarded in such a way, it's designed in such a way. And so my thought process is, obviously we can't have the same thing, but we should have more things in place to be able to stop people in rings of security, rather than just good guy with gun versus bad guy with gun. And the rest of you are in between, and hopefully, you guys are able to run, hide, or fight. That to me, when I look at that, I understand why that is being taught. And I definitely don't disagree with it, because I think that is a great thing to teach people, especially in a mass, for everybody. Just run if you can, hide if you have to, fight as a last resort. I get the psychology there, and I get tactically why we would want to teach everybody something they can remember very easily. So that's why with that space, I want to bring my experience to it, but I'm always open-minded. And if somebody out there hears this, and of somebody who's invented something that could save lives, like that's how I ended up having several of my guests. I ended up being introduced to them by somebody who heard about this podcast and reached out to their buddy and got in touch with me. And of course, they're prior law enforcement, military, Rangers, whatever it was, that are doing that, because again, that's our background. So it makes sense. So School to Embassy Project is the name. Again, I may end up having another podcast. I haven't really. On Switch is also the secondary part of that, which I had built both at the same time, just because I wanted to have something else where I could interview people like the man who lost 300 pounds, no diet pills, no surgery, no anything, just 500 pounds, stopped eating crap, started walking, and now he's less than 200 pounds. And the Subway offered him over 10 million to be the new spokesman, and he turned them down because nobody wants to follow Jared. And the personal trainer who's at the gym, who just happens to meet him as he's coming into the gym, she used to be 380 pounds, no surgery, no diet pills, no anything, just stopped eating crap, changed their life, and completely transformed who they are. And those two people were on my podcast. And I was like, I've got to have something for people like that I meet. And so that's why I started On Switch. I'm still morphing. I'm still trying to figure out really my space, but I don't want to water down the School to Embassy Project. I believe STEP is a really good, idea, and I want to keep doing that, but I want to find people who can speak intelligently about it. And of course, I have my list of, the FBI lady who actually runs the Stop Killing podcast herself. She was in charge of the FBI. She wrote several books when the Run, Hide, Fight was kind of created, that task force under Obama. Like those people like that I'd love to have on my podcast. That's what I'm kind of waiting for, is to get other people that really have expertise. I don't want to water that down and just start getting people who want to talk about the topic. I want to have that as a steady, these people are the people you want to hear on this topic. And so I may have to step out and wait for a little while as I get people to do that. But yeah, that's me. And I'm on social media, but I'm now going by my name. All this time I've been going by aliases. Of course, anybody with special operations background, we never went by our real names online a lot, of course. And being a Ranger, you gotta be disagreeable. So you just got to make up a funny name online. But yeah, School to Embassy Project is how you can find me. I have my own website. I've got 3 months worth of podcasts every week. I was putting one out every Friday, but like I said, I've taken a step back. I will be back, and and I'm definitely going to have you on one of those podcasts, and we'll definitely talk more, because I want to hear from you and not just talk the whole time, because I definitely want to hear your stories, and especially since your background with the prison system, because I know you've got some stories to tell there too.
Yeah, you guys let me know. I'm going to be happy to come on your podcast for sure.
For sure, brother. All right, well, I'm going to get to work.
Have a good one. Be safe,
Thanks, brother. Take care.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.